Jon, thank you for joining us. If you wouldn't mind, just provide a summary of your background and where you are and what type of work that you're working on these days.
Yeah, sure. So, last time we talked, I was at Trinity Health. I was the vice president of provider compensation and contracts. I've since gone back to the consulting world and am a principal at ECG Management Consulting. Before I went to Trinity, I spent 10 years in consulting, worked for some great firms, got great experience. Being on the industry side was a phenomenal experience. Got the chance to lead, got to see healthcare from a completely different perspective, and got to meet some amazing people, right? But, coming back to where I'm at now, I think I can maybe have a bigger impact on the consulting side. The things that I'm seeing out there right now is that, organizations over the last 20 years have built this giant mass of employed physicians, especially, 50% were employed about 20 years ago, and now it's over 80%. But they haven't really changed or updated the structure of their business to handle employment of doctors and APPs at that scale. And none of the systems that they're using are built to manage provider employment. So they have that issue going. And simultaneously, there's a shortage of people who do the work that we do in those organizations. And oftentimes they're not necessarily at the right level. So decisions about which software you're going to use or how workflows are going to be occurring between finance and HR and payroll in the world of provider employment, those decisions sometimes get made by the finance or HR or legal leader for a different purpose. And then provider employment issues are sometimes retrofit into those decisions. And I think it's time for organizations to start thinking about, is that working anymore? And specifically in the world of leadership roles and provider comp and contracts, should there be another avenue for people to go? When you reach the VP level, maybe there's an SVP level after that, but there's no C-level job in our profession. There's no chief provider compensation officer, or in this case, maybe chief provider resources officer, if you want to call it that. CPRO has a nice ring, but it's how do we create that pathway for people? How do you create a path for people to grow as an organization needs it to grow and tackle things that clearly need to be tackled? That's what I'm thinking about right now and kind of what I'm seeing in the market.
Yeah, that brings up so many great points when you're talking about the evolution of that in your journey. Similar pathways. I've been on the consulting side, the in-house side, and then now the technology side. And you get to see the spectrum. But I think you touched on kind of job satisfaction.
Yeah.
But you've also mentioned providers are kind of a unique workforce asset. They're the linchpin for most organizations. And there's a lot of workflows that touch HR, finance, compliance, clinical leadership, strategy, and planning. There's a continuum of areas where this provider compensation touches. But where does it report at through the organization in making those changes? Because I think even when you look at HRIS systems for even a nuanced thing like FTE, it's designed for an HRIS system, but provider compensation needs a different workflow on that. But they don't have a voice at the table to make those changes.
That's exactly right. And, I think it's to the detriment of especially large organizations to not realize that that's an issue. Because at the end of the day, they can try to go through their next wave of mergers and acquisitions or growth. And as you do that, as they've realized over the last 10 to 15 years, especially of this growth period of provider employment, the problems that you had 10 years ago, they don't get better with scale. Like the fact that you don't have a centralized provider database or a provider roster, that one single source of truth to managing that information. That's not going to change or get better just because you're getting bigger in size. It's going to make everything worse.
It's getting more complicated as well. I'd say you still have a lot of independent arrangements. You have arrangements like your local anesthesiology group, your radiology group. You also have, with this workforce shortages, that leveraging APPs, that's the largest growing area, CRNAs. So your workforce is getting larger in the types of arrangements and the type of services, their credentials. If you don't have a centralized management structure to manage that in an effective way, it's going to be challenging.
It absolutely is. And, the disconnect that occurs sometimes too between organizations that might have been managing their providers, let's say under HR, and then their physicians under physician comp operations, and, maybe a little bit of HR, depending, merging those two things together, especially when it comes to recruiting and how you're managing your contract process, I think is key. And organizations that have made headway in bringing more synergy to those departments and bringing more collaboration to those departments, I think that they've experienced success because of those changes. Now, in organizations that are kind of moving all that stuff under one leader, I think those are tenfold. It's really like finally there's a person who sees all these different provider employment issues happening in an organization and has the autonomy to work with their peers on building solutions that make sense to manage those problems. And, I've seen a lot of organizations move in the direction of chief physician executives and others, on the clinical side, taking a larger role in leadership, especially in the provider enterprise. I love that. I think having physician engagement, having physician leadership is critically important to the success of any provider enterprise in any healthcare organization. The physician perspective is completely necessary and should be a huge driving force in everything we do. The thing that I see occurring, though, as a result, is a lot of times the technical back office decisions that are kind of being made by the same leaders. And, I don't know if that's the right structure. Like, I think that sometimes if you haven't been in the weeds on these technical problems, it's hard to make informed decisions about how to maneuver your business correctly for those things. And I know many of them can gain a good high-level understanding of accounting and finance and payroll and understand the general function of what's occurring. But if you've never actually been an analyst or a comp manager or sat in those positions where you have to see how those everyday workflows happen, it gets tough, especially in technical implementations on, how to move that forward. And that's where I see a disconnect.
Jon, we've seen a lot of evolution of provider compensation teams, but I have a sense that the pace of change has just been moving quicker and quicker. Mm-hmm. Technology, the demand on the workforce and how we provide those services. What are some strategies that you've been using to kind of manage the transformation or the pace of change that you've seen in this area?
In my role in Trinity, I've witnessed this firsthand because all these fee schedule changes occurred in a pretty short time frame right after we were trying to deal with, holdover models during COVID and all these other things that we had to put in place. And your traditional comp team's not really set up to manage large change management. You typically have like a comp director, comp manager, comp analyst, and their main functions or scope are managing reconciliations, managing compliance maybe, and then let's say all those other provider employment data issues that surround compensation and contracts, right? But that's not necessarily the same skill set or team that you want to build to manage things like we need to redesign our entire comp model and implement a new one by the end of the year in order to deal with the fee schedule change. That takes a different degree of analytics and skill set. And some teams have that built internally, and that's great. And other organizations have to look externally for that. In my role in the consulting field now, what I think about is how can I be most valuable to clients in that area? If you need me to help you in an interim basis because you've had a leadership change or you are missing staff and you need people to plug in, if we are managing a comp design, but you're also simultaneously managing a technology implementation, how can we make sure that we're handling that really carefully so that we're not doing a bunch of rework or, not understanding the full complexity of the things that the team's already done. I think teams get burned out and start to fail when the work that they're doing doesn't get recognized or it gets too overlooked. And I think there's a lot of people in our industry who feel that way because they don't necessarily have, in a lot of cases, their own department with their own senior leadership. And they're just kind of, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases, an afterthought. And that's something that, I'm laser focused on now because my perspective of being on that side of things has informed it. I wouldn't want to come in and have a comp design project forced on me when I just spent the last year building something completely different, and I'm very aware of those things. So, trying to take all that into consideration when you're building and maintaining teams through staffing shortages and high demand for our skill set, I think it's really important for any comp leader to be considering. But, more importantly, I think organizations should be paying attention to this a lot more. Otherwise, like the pool for their talent is going to continue to shrink because there's no lack of things to do for people who have provider comp skill sets. There's consulting opportunities, software opportunities, lots of healthcare, side administration opportunities. And, I think it is really important to be aware of that, job satisfaction factor, but also the career growth factor. And I would say skill set, scope factor. Are we asking people to do too much in these roles? And where is the right balance? How do you find it?
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of points that are probably interrelated. You talked about job satisfaction and burnout. What does that career path look like? And you also mentioned the fee schedule. And I think that that's something that highlights, if you're at an organization, the fee schedule is becoming tougher and tougher to manage. You put that on your team and don't have the right resources to manage that. Then now, AMA, they just decide to change the maternity code set, which is fantastic because us physician comp folks have been probably doing some back end calculations to redistribute that work. But now we have to unwind that. But how do you, I think the analysis of that is so complex. Now you're just throwing that onto your comp team. Right. What is the right way to manage it? You know what I mean? Like, is it, I think reaching out for help, using your consultants and advisor to work through these complicated matters is probably an area that you can take off your internal team and kind of shuffle that around.
And I think it's so organization specific. I mean, obviously being in the consulting business now, I'd be like, I would love it for people to call me and have me help them, through that and navigate it. Right. But, when I was on that side, I handled a lot of that stuff internally, just because I had that skill set and I was comfortable doing it. And I'd built people on the team too who could kind of handle it. So we would manage through a lot of it internally. And, other teams kind of done the same thing, but it's getting harder just because at a larger scale and organizations continue to grow, the day-to-day business of just managing your comp program is a full-time job. And you're doing all this other stuff on the side of your desk. It does make sense to supplement in consulting and have people come in who that's all they do, is manage through that change and have expertise in that area. And I agree with you. I think the fee schedule changes that are coming for OB are a positive thing, but it's going to cost so many, financial and operational changes for people who've been running it in a, duct tape and 2x4 way, where you're just sort of strapping things together to work around what's there. And now all of a sudden they change it and you have to react. And the variables involved when you have finance asking for updated forecasts at a certain time and operations wondering what this is going to do to their call coverage, it's complicated.
Fee schedule. Love the positive change with the maternity. AMA, if you're out there listening to this, call the AAPCP and work with us on how to make this transition better for all the physicians in the employment arrangements. So AMA, a little shout out. Hopefully they call us and take us up on the offer.
You know where to find us.
Jon, I've got one last question. So today, consulting physician compensation. What did 10-year-old Jon want to do?
Oh man, pick a day. I think at one point I wanted to be a rock star. Another point I wanted to be a professional golfer. That dream hasn't died, by the way. I have 8 years until the senior PGA Tour qualification, so I'm working on it. But yeah, I think I just wanted to do something at any point in time, different. I change interests a lot, and I have a lot of hobbies, so. That's a good question. But 10-year-old me was probably at the time either golf or music, which are still two things that I do to this day.
I can see it. I can see you headlining for Metallica or maybe John Mayer. I don't know. What are the two?
It's somewhere in between, probably. I'm a Lord Huron guy myself.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time and just great insights and leadership from your insights on your side. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.